All right, looks like we are ready to go here today. So, hello and welcome, everyone, and welcome to Psychedelics for Alcoholism. Our panel today, we have an amazing one lined up for you. So, thank you for joining us. This is a very special panel. My name is Shannon Smedella, and I'm happy to be your host for this panel. You might remember me from MAPS Canada's Examining the Psychedelic Renaissance, Season 1 and 2, and from the inaugural World Psychedelics Day this past June, where I had the pleasure of interviewing over 50 experts in the psychedelic space. So I also have the pleasure of hosting the first ever Clearmind event this past October, which some of you might have been at. We had over 600 people registered to hear about MEAI, which we're going to talk about today. And I'm more than honored to be here again today with both Mark Hayden and Adi Zulafshani, who you're going to speak with in a bit. So they will answer your questions regarding a new potential treatment for alcoholism. So just some housekeeping items for today. We will start with answering your questions. With our two panelists here today, we had over 70 questions from the last webinar. So we've gone through those and we're going to answer some of those today, in addition to ones that were answered in the last webinar. And after that, we're going to take some live questions. So feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A as they come up during the event. And if we end up having a chat going here, make sure and let us know where you're tuning in from in the chat as well. So both the Q&A and chat, you'll be able to find those buttons at the bottom of the screen here. So before we bring on our speakers today, bring them in here and introduce them, some quick information on the issue at hand. Alcoholism, addiction, and trauma in general affect a large majority of our society. And knowing that there could be an effective, widespread solution that could make a profound impact on those suffering is both remarkable and uplifting. So alcohol use disorder is characterized by a difficulty to stop control with alcohol use despite adverse social, occupational, or health consequences. And according to the CDC, binge drinking typically happens when a person consumes 5 or more drinks in about 2 hours. 37 million US adults, 1 in 6, binge drink once a week in the US, and alcohol consumption contributes to 3 million deaths each year globally, in addition to disabilities and poor health of millions of people. So we're going to do a quick poll here. And the question for the poll is, you'll see it come up on your screen momentarily. How many people here today have been directly affected by either binge drinking, alcohol use disorder, or have had someone closely affected to you? So you'll see it pop up on the screen. Go ahead and fill that out there. Don't worry, you don't have to participate, but if you would like to, let us know in the poll there. All right, so we have some people filling it out here. We can see a large majority have been affected. So this is definitely something that is a big issue in our society, as you can see here. So as you know, this event is put on by a company called Clearmind Medicine, and Clearmind Medicine is a new psychedelic company focused on developing a novel psychedelic as a treatment for alcoholism and binge drinking. So if you'd like to find out more about Clearmind, be sure to visit the website at clearmindmedicine.com. So today, as I've mentioned, we will be talking about a potential medicine to treat alcoholism. This medicine is currently called MEAI. So MEAI is considered a non-hallucinogenic psychedelic. It is slightly euphoric and gives a pleasant feeling of satiation. Of course, we will find out more about MEAI when we bring on Dr. Adi Zulafshani and Adjunct Professor Mark Hayden. So before we begin, just a quick disclaimer. The views expressed here are solely those of the presenters in their private capacity, do not in any way represent the views of Clearmind Medicine. Furthermore, the views and opinions expressed by the speakers are not an endorsement or medical counsel or advice on the prescription of or taking psychedelics, not regulated by the authorities. And as you will hear from Clearmind CEO Dr. Adi Zulafshani shortly here, MEAI has not yet been approved by the FDA or Health Canada. So let's introduce both of them. So Dr. Adi Zulafshani, PhD, is Clearmind CEO. Adi is a biomedical research and development executive with a vast experience with over 20 years of strategic and operational leadership in the healthcare industry and a deep understanding of therapeutics development in heavily regulated environments. Dr. Zulafshani holds a PhD in human biology and immunology from Bar Ilan University in Israel. Adjunct Professor Mark Hayden is former Executive Director of MAPS Canada. Mark was the Executive Director of MAPS Canada for 10 years. He's an Adjunct Professor at the University of British Columbia School of Public and Population Health. He has published on the issue of drug control policy and psychedelics and worked for the Addiction Services for 28 years. Mark is currently the Director of Clinical Research for Psygen and part of Clearmind's Scientific Advisory Board. So let's get into these questions. I know we've had some really great questions come in. So we're going to get into that and answer a few of them now. So welcome, Mark and Adi. Are you guys ready to answer these questions?
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Shannon.
Go into, if there's anything anyone wants to say prior to the questions, feel free to do that. Otherwise, I'll get into the first question here.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for everyone who joined us today. I'm very excited to be here and to try to answer some of the questions. So thank you.
All right, here's the first question. And we had many, so it was really hard for us to go through them and select the best one. And this is a very popular one, and this one I think we'll give to Adi. So when will this be available, and where can I obtain it? Regarding trials, can you tell us about phase 1, where they will occur, and is it possible to participate? And perhaps you can talk about the clinical trial pathway. So when is this going to be available and where can I obtain it?
Sure. So it's very important to emphasize that the route that we have chosen to take MEAI for is an FDA route, which means that it's a pharmaceutical development program. So we need to go through phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3. And we are doing it because we want to be able to bring to the market not only efficacious product, but also safe product. So that's why this is the route that we have chosen. So it might take a bit until it will be available. But we are, as we discussed several times, or as we published, we intend to be in a phase 1 clinical trial by the end of next year. And would it be possible to participate? So I do hope so. It's too early to say where the study is going to take place. It might be US, it might be other jurisdiction, and taking the FDA route doesn't necessarily mean that we have to have clinical trials in the US, at least until a phase 3 study. So we'll be, please visit our website, look where the clinical trial is going to be. Please let us know if it's something that might be interesting for you to participate in a clinical trial. And if it's applicable, we'll be happy to reach out and let you know more details. So I hope I answered the questions. Have I missed something?
Perfect. Thank you so much. In regards to the clinical trial pathway, just for those that are here with us today that don't know or what exactly a clinical trial pathway is,
Sure.
do you think you could just briefly describe that for us?
Yes, absolutely. So MEI considered to be an NCE, which stands for New Chemical Entity. It means that no one is doing anything with MEI currently in the world, and no one has done anything, at least under a regulatory pathway, which means that we need to start from the beginning and show safety, first in preclinical settings, which means animals, and then when we show that it's safe, we can go to humans. And as I said, in terms of timelines, how long it takes to actually start doing clinical trials in humans, it will be approximately 1 year. That's the amount of time that we need in order not just to get safety information from animal models, but also to get the final formulation that we are going to use, to manufacture the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient in the GMP way. So to have a product that it's essentially ready to be sold. Obviously, only after it will be, we will go through phase 2 and 3 and get permission. But essentially, phase 1 means that we already have the product as we see it, that it will be eventually marketed.
All right, thank you so much. So let's move on to the next question, and this is in regards to the administration of MEAI. So the question is, how will MEAI be administered? And how does Clearmind expect to deliver this solution? So, for example, would people purchase MEAI and then personally be responsible for adding it to their own drinks of choice? Could you also market MEAI as a beverage with a molecule already contained in it? Would health practitioners be able to integrate it into their own modalities? So people are really wondering what the administration is for MEAI, and we're wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that, or what you expect or perceive it to be.
Yeah, expect is the right word. So we expect, first of all, as I explained earlier, the MEAI is going to be some kind of a treatment, which means that it's not necessarily going to be sold as a beverage, and also indication-wise, it's not. It's alcohol use disorder. That's the indication we're pursuing. That's the population that we're pursuing, which means that it will be just like any other drug that you take chronically, most probably. People will take it once a day. They will be able, again, everything is speculation, but this is how we are going to design the study, the clinical study. But we see it as people will consume it once daily in the privacy of their own home. They will not, it won't be like other psychedelics that needs to be taken under a specific session with under psychiatric control. So it will probably be oral, probably be a pill. Again, this is exactly how we are now designing the phase 1 study. It's going to be a pill, it's going to be oral administration, it's going to be once daily. So not necessarily a beverage. So you will not have to mix it in your drink. A practitioner will be able to integrate it into their own treatment modality, whether it's some kind of a psychiatric treatment that people seek, or a psychological treatment. But I think that the main point to emphasize is that it will be just like any other drug that you will be able to consume in the privacy of your own home.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And that actually leads into another question that came up, and you have already answered part of this question, and I think we'll maybe direct this one a little bit to Mark as well. But and the question was, do you need a therapy session while on MEAI? You've already mentioned no. You're expecting it to be self-administered, but is it suggested, or could this be taken in combination with therapy and counseling? And if so, what would a standard treatment session look like? If a therapy program, is brought in, would Clearmind be training therapists at some point? So these are just general questions that have come in regards to therapy. So maybe, Mark, you can touch on that a little bit here.
Sure. Thank you, Shannon. So I'd like to, before I ask that question, I'd like to talk about the various places where I'm going to sit in order to answer these questions. Because essentially, if you think about the whole process of drug development and where it starts, I mean, Adi talked about the clinical trial pathway of stage 1, 2, and 3, which is about safety in humans and then does it work? But I want to go back a notch. I mean, really, before any clinical trial happens, the equivalent for me is people sitting around a campfire telling stories. And so we're in to some extent, we're in the story stage. We're just kind of comparing notes. And then if I notice as I sit around the campfire saying this was my experience, and then I talk to somebody else across the campfire and they had a similar experience, it just becomes really of interest if people are telling the same story and seem to have the same experiences. And then you have to ask the question, is it safe? And then that's the whole preclinical toxicology thing. And the telling stories is called anecdotal. And then the preclinical toxicology is is it safe? And then is it effective? Or is it safe in humans? And then is it effective? So that's essentially the clinical trial pathway. And so what we have right now is we have a survey that I'm going to talk about that was done with a group of people who were invited to multiple parties by a woman named Terry. And she invited her community to come by, and she gave them unlimited access to food and alcohol. And then she gave them PACE, wrong. She gave them MEAI before they drank any of the alcohol or ate any of the food. And so it was just an interesting, and then she asked them to do a survey, and I'll talk about the outcome of that survey. It's not good science, but it's a piece of the puzzle. It's a small piece of the puzzle. And quite frankly, I've talked to people individually who have taken this, and I've had, this is back to the campfire thing. I've had conversations with people who have tried it. In fact, I've had lots of conversations with people who have tried it. And so I'll be gathering all of that in order to answer the questions. So the first question you asked is, do you need therapy with MEI? The short answer is no. It's really the way that we're thinking about it is that it will be just something that people can take when they want to drink, or perhaps other addictive behaviors. Now, that doesn't mean it couldn't be used in therapy, because the experience of MEI is quite a positive one and does tend to lead to conversation. So it is a very conversational kind of experience. So it doesn't mean it couldn't be used in therapy, but that's not how we're thinking about it. We're thinking about it as something you just simply take when you want to go out drinking. And other folks have heard me say, if there are people who are on this webinar before, you've heard me say this before, but I want to briefly describe the experience of MEI for those folks who are new. If you put 80 milligrams in a glass and drink it, it feels like you've had one beer. If you repeat that, it feels like you've had 2 beers. By that, I mean, relaxed, happy, slightly disinhibited. It's a positive experience. If you repeat that experience again, it feels like about 30 milligrams of MDMA. For those who haven't taken MDMA, that's a pink and fuzzy and warm and mildly euphoric and connecting experience to the other people around you, and even more disinhibiting than alcohol. If you repeat the experience, the abrupt change is actually quite bizarre. And the best analogy for it that I've ever found is, imagine you've just finished eating 2 pieces of cheesecake, chocolate covered, goopy, creamy cheesecake. And then somebody puts a 3rd piece of cheesecake in front of you and hands you a fork. There's no part of your brain that can imagine eating more cheesecake. But why? Why can't you eat more? It's not like you're completely intoxicated, or you can't walk, or you're hanging off the ceiling, you're so stimulated, or your locomotion is completely impaired, so you can't, you're incredibly sedated. You can't eat the cheesecake because you're sick of cheesecake. You're satiated. So MEI is essentially a satiation experience. It starts positive and then abruptly ends with complete satiation, which is, it's a fascinating experience. It's a very strange molecule, actually. So because it is warm and fuzzy and engaging, I could imagine it being used in therapy, but that's not how we're thinking about it. We're thinking about it as just something you take when you want to drink alcohol or anything else, and you enjoy the experience, but you also abruptly stop.
Thank you so much, Mark, for filling us in on that. We're going to have quite a few more questions specifically in regards to MEAI here in a bit, and the effects that it brings on. But I do have a question here in regards to some peer-reviewed articles, and someone is wondering if there are any existing peer-reviewed articles on studies that have been conducted.
So the answer is yes, there are a few. and mostly speaking about preclinical studies, which means data in animal models. And actually in the near future, it will be available through our website, so you can just download it from there. So yes.
Perfect. And that's on clearmindmedicine.com.
Right.
And just a reminder, because I know we've had a few more people join us here, if you have any questions while we're going through these questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A and we'll be able to get to those at the end of the webinar today. So the next question we have is, after phase 3, how long before the generics can compete? And is anyone else, doing any research on MEAI?
Right. So protection-wise, we are the only company that owns worldwide rights for the usage of MEI for different binge behaviors, and also for alcohol substitutes and other patents as well. So because we are protected by patents, and patents have shelf life, if you will, of 20 years, it means that we have a protection of 20 years. Also because if you remember mentioning that I mentioned that MEI considered to be an NCE, a new chemical entity, we also have protection by FDA for companies who develops NCEs for 5 years. So we are protected. We have done a very comprehensive research to understand if we are the only company who owns patents for MEI or doing something with MEI, and the answer was yes. No other company in the world, to the best of our knowledge, doing something with MEI or own patents for the usage of MEI. So yes, we are protected, which means that generics will not be able to compete at least until 2035 or 36 even.
Wow. And that's something that's quite unique to Clearmind in regards to the patent.
Right.
You see many other...
You're absolutely right.
For
You're
sure.
absolutely right. I think that in the world of psychedelics, the most challenging area is patents, because when you doing something with natural products like psilocybin, like mushrooms, or even chemicals, but they are well known and they were synthesized a long time ago, like LSD and Mdma, it's very crowded and it's very hard to obtain patents. But Clearmind, not only that we have patents for, as I said, molecule that no other company is doing anything with, we also the patents are also granted, which is also not very common situation. So yes, I think that also in patent-wise, we are quite distinguished from other companies. So I'm happy to say that.
Mm-hmm. Perfect, thank you. While we're on the patent you touched on, the molecule, now I just want to ask this question because we're on that topic. So is it natural or is it synthetic, MEAI?
Synthetics. It's synthetics, and actually it's beneficial for a treatment to be based on synthetics, because the problem, first of all, FDA root means any regulatory agency. When you take something to be a pharmaceutical drug, it has to be something that you can have consistency from batch to batch. It's not something that varies. And this almost only qualifies for something that you synthesize synthetically. You can also have phyto-derived compounds that also meet the regulatory expectations, if you will, or regulations. But there's no it means that essentially at the end of the process, you have a molecule that had some effect, and it doesn't really matter whether it was phyto-derived or synthetically synthesized. So in terms of consistency from batch to batch, and also the ability to give you something that you can know exactly how much you consume, and you want the consumption to be the same from day to day, that's almost something that you can do almost only with synthetics. So
Mm-hmm.
So yes.
Thank you so much. So we're going to really get into MEAI here, and the next question I have is, and this one might be for you, Mark. You've touched on this a little bit already, but does MEAI feel bad, like other harm reduction solutions that you mentioned in the last webinar? And how long does the effect last? How does it feel?
Well, let's start high level. So what other addiction treatment options are available for alcoholism? I mean, there's AA, which is abstinence-based. There's counseling, where you deal with your past trauma and really try and understand your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and work with the therapeutic paradigm. In terms of medicines, there's naltrexone, which takes away the pleasure of alcohol. There's antabuse, disulfiram, which is makes you violently ill if you drink alcohol. So the downsides of those, I mean, antabuse is obvious. People very rarely ever want to repeat the experience. It's very unpleasant. In fact, it's violently unpleasant. So that's not something that anybody ever wants to repeat. The naltrexone just makes the whole experience less attractive. So the unique thing about MEI is it increases the attractiveness. It's a positive experience initially, and then it results in this complete satiation response. So it's something that people want to do, and then they suddenly stop. So I want to talk a little bit about this survey that was done, because that really helps to kind of enlighten or illuminate this discussion. So there was a woman, her name was Terry, and she invited people from her community to come to a focus group. Quite frankly, it was a party. And what she said is, you'll have unlimited access to food and unlimited access to alcohol. And the only deal is you take these drinks of MEAI before you participate in drinking anything. I talked to her yesterday. I said, how many people came by that you believed had either heavy drinking as an issue in their lives, or you observed them to be completely out of control with their drinking and therefore they're alcoholics? Now, again, this is not science. This is one individual's observations of a focus group that she ran, and she ran it many times, so many people went through it. And she did ask people to complete a survey at the end. And it was fascinating. What she observed is, what she told me is, about somewhere between a third and 50% of the people she believed had a problem with alcohol. And so, or they were defined as being alcoholic or observed to be alcoholic by her. And when she asked them, did you drink less? The answer was a scale between 1 and 5. And the average number was 4.67. So between 1 and 5, 4.67 people said they drank less alcohol. Now, curiously enough, and she didn't set them up for that. She didn't tell them what the experience was going to be. But she also asked, did you smoke less cigarettes? And did you eat less food? And so the answer of the smoking was 4.1, and the answer of the food was 4.2. So what it seemed to be very helpful for both smoking and alcohol consumption. Again, she observed, I mean, her father, who she described as being a very, very long-term chronic alcoholic for many decades, used MEI and subsequently stopped drinking and stopped smoking, which completely puzzled us. We didn't expect to see the stopping smoking. We kind of had some clues about the drinking, but the smoking was actually quite puzzling to us. So the satiation effect seems to be larger than just alcohol. And one of the questions they also asked is, would you prefer to have MEAI or MEAI and alcohol? And the answer was 1.7. So essentially, most people preferred the MEAI experience with alcohol. So it was attractive, but then they stopped drinking and stopped smoking, which just is completely wild if you really think about it. Now, I want to also compare it to the benzodiazepines, because the benzodiazepines are have been proposed historically as a treatment for alcoholism. Now that's the Valium, Ativan, Cirex, clorazepam, lorazepam, anything ending in PAM, Valium and Ativan being the two most common. So I used to work in a detox center, and I can absolutely vouch for you, the most horrible drug to withdraw from are benzodiazepines. They're just completely obnoxious. They're very emotional and very, very dramatic, and very challenging. They're horrible. And so the idea that alcohol could be replaced by a benzo is really just a horrible, it's a horrible suggestion. It works because benzos are very similar to alcohol, and people who take a lot of alcohol tend to like benzos because of their similar sedating nature. So one can understand why they've been proposed, but if you ever work in a detox center, you're just really putting people in a whole other trap. That's a really obnoxious place to be. So MEAI seems to me, having worked in 28 years in the world of addictions, to be a really interesting molecule that we need to know more about, and we really need to chase this. And that's quite frankly where I've joined Clearmind, is I just think it's so fascinating. Did I answer your question, Shannon?
You did, and you actually brought up a couple of other ones that
Okay.
were quite popular questions that came in from the viewers. I'm going to touch on one of them now because you did talk about benzos, and the question was, are you not just making alcoholics addicted to MEAI and not addressing the underlying problem? So you did touch on that already, but that was a very popular question that came in as well in regards to can people get
let's play with that a little bit. So let's look at addiction. So addiction happens for a variety of reasons. I mean, when you're addicted to opiates, you're reducing pain. And so people with a lot of pain, either emotional or physical pain, tend to be really attracted to opiates. There are sort of emotional elements to addiction. There are physical elements to addiction. You know, working in a detox center, you see the various types of physical distress that people have when they're withdrawing from the different drugs. We don't know yet how MEI is, but it's not that attractive. You know, it's not an exciting drug to take. It's not, oh my God, this reduces my pain, or this feels fantastic. It doesn't feel fantastic. So the things that pull people into addiction don't really apply to MEI because it's fairly subtle in its positive experience. It's not hugely positive. It's just a little bit positive. It's positive enough to get people to want to take it, but it's not positive enough to really want to take it again and again and again. And then even if you do really like it at first, you hit this wall with it that's a very blunt and clear wall. That satiation thing is an abrupt end to the experience.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much.
I just want to add on the things that Mark mentioned and say that from the preclinical studies that were done and those surveys that Mark mentioned, we didn't see any signs of addiction, but obviously this is something that we are testing. This is something that we will probably be able to share sometimes next year, because this is something we are looking into. It's obviously that we will not bring something that it's addictive. We don't want to replace one addiction with another. So it's something that we will definitely need to show. And this is something that we aim to show. So that's a very good question. And obviously that's the first box that we need to check to show that MEA is not addictive.
Yes. I mean, it's curious because, again, this is small n anecdotal is what it's called. Terry's father, who was a chronic alcoholic, has used it to stop drinking completely and stop smoking. What Terry has to do is remind him to take it, which is fascinating. He doesn't, you know, he's not opposed to taking it, but he's not that attracted to it that he's really waking up in the morning wanting to take it. It's not that good. But she reminds him, he takes it, and then he doesn't drink all day, which is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much, Mark. So there is another question here that was extremely popular, and it's in regards to the expectation of it being used to help other addictions. So, some of the things that came in, and we talked about this already, but there's, opiate, cannabis, technology, gambling, eating disorders. There were so many questions that came in to that. So, is there any intention to eventually use MEAI specifically for other addictions?
Yeah, I was schooled in the world of MAPS, and what they did is prove that MDMA worked for PTSD and then quickly expanded the indications to maximize the field that MDMA can be used with. I believe Clearmind medicine is going to do the same. So start with alcoholism, because that's kind of the most intuitively obvious one, but then expand and just see. And honestly, we have some clues that it works with our addictions, but they're just clues and we don't know yet. And so would it work with, I mean, I'll give you my own intuitive gut feeling that is not a reliable source. Is that alcoholism, absolutely. Things like eating disorders, because you're pairing it with something that you're kind of consuming, it would make sense. I have a tougher time kind of thinking about it from a smoking point of view, and I find it just fascinating that the survey said it was useful for that. Would it work with intravenous drugs? I don't really have an intuitive feel for that at all. And gambling, if you kind of take a shot of MEAI as you're pulling the one-armed bandit, I just absolutely have no idea. So these are questions for science, and we're not there yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank
I
you.
just want to add to Mark's words that we have just had a press release speaking about a joint work that we are going to do with the scientists from the Hebrew University, looking at the potential of MEI to also be helpful for binge eating and eating disorders. So again, this is something that we are definitely looking into already now.
Thanks, Adi. Are there any current toxicities that are known with MEAI?
So there's been one paper that has been submitted for publication. So it is science, and I read it, and it looks like good science to me. And they looked at, not humans, they looked at mice, I believe, or was it rats? But they observed, it was rats. Thank you, Addie. They observed that sort of, if I take the numbers that they gave to the rats and then I translate it to humans, is that 8 dosages were well tolerated and had no behavioral effects. 80 dosages. Now, I can't even imagine 80 dosages. I can imagine 3 to 4 dosages, but I couldn't even imagine 80. So at 80 dosages, there were some adverse clinical signs. So what that actually tells us is it's a safe molecule from a rat perspective when we do that translation. And I've looked at other preclinical toxicology data, and that's kind of in the same ballpark with other psychedelics. And so it seems to be a very safe molecule, yes, from the preliminary unpublished work that's been done is beginning to point to the direction that it's a very safe molecule.
Perfect, thanks. So is MEAI a psychedelic? And how does it compare to other psychedelic medicines that might be out there?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. And Shannon, if you want me to close my curtain behind me, let me know. The lighting is changing in Vancouver and it's getting weird.
You're illuminated, Mark. I think it's fine.
Okay, I'm backlit. Okay, so is MEAI psychedelic? I could give you both a yes and a no response. So let's go for the no first, and then let's go for the yes. So the no is it's not like LSD or psilocybin. So it's not visually intense. It's not disorienting of the ego. It's not dramatic and spiritual. So all of these sort of classical psychedelic experiences, the wow experience after you've done 500 mics of LSD, no, absolutely not at all. So it's not psychedelic in that way. Is it psychedelic like MDMA? Well, yes, it's like a very, very mild MDMA experience, pink and fuzzy and warm and emotional and feeling close to people and wanting to talk. So it depends really on your definition of psychedelics. If you're restricted to the classical psychedelics, which are LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, and dimethyltryptamine in ayahuasca, it's not even remotely similar to those at all. But it is remotely similar to the empathogens, so the empathogens being MDMA, MDA, and 3-MMC. So, non-ego disorienting, warm, fuzzy, close feelings to other people. So you can answer that question either yes or no, depending on how you define a psychedelic.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. Adi, did you have anything to add to that?
No.
I'm going to close my curtain because the sun is actually bothering me.
Absolutely. And I have another question for Mark, but actually, you know what, Adi? While Mark's closing his curtain, I was wondering if you could tell us what receptors are involved with MEAI. Is it a serotonin-based inhibitor, for example?
So I don't want to go so much into mechanism of action because we just don't know it yet. There are some speculations, there are also some evidence speaking about the serotonin receptor family and also specific receptors in this family. But really, I would be happy to speak more about it. It's also a study that we are currently running, so I'll be happy to speak about it when we have more information. But currently, the specific mechanism of action is unknown.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I do want to touch a little bit on the word psychedelic as well. And Mark, you just answered the question in regards to MEAI being a psychedelic or not. Some people watching the webinar today might not have ever done a psychedelic. And there is a little bit of a stigma attached to that word. So, what is Clearmind doing to kind of combat, to combat that stigma? Since many people resonate, with the war on drugs, what are we doing? What is Clearmind doing to dispel that stigma around psychedelics?
So I think that what we're doing is actually taking the route that we have chosen to take. We are taking the pharmaceutical, all pharmaceutical road to FDA, to the market. We want to show that the drug that we are developing is safe, it's efficacious. We are going to look at all adverse events associated with the usage of MEI. We're doing every step that any other normal drug, if you will. I don't know even how to call it, but the entire route of really having a stamp from FDA, from EMA, from any regulatory agency around the world showing that the drug is completely safe and completely efficacious. And also, I think that FDA has done some work in order to really show people that that psychedelics is not what it used to be or considered to be. When everyone went into war against cannabis and against psychedelic drugs, there's already a proven drug, esketamine, that was approved by FDA. There's another, the studies that Mark mentioned that was done by MAPS using Mdma to PTSD. They completed a phase 3 study with a very, very good results, and everyone assumed that the drug would be approved sometimes in 2022. There's also the cannabinoids and the medical cannabis, where we have more and more information that it's useful. It's not something that you take to get high, but it has also many effective benefits. So I think that gradually the word psychedelics, the word cannabis really returns. It's not something new, but it returns to the definitions that he had at the beginning, when that was most of the medicine cabinet that everyone used and everyone had. It got this awful name of drugs. So I think that Clearmind and other companies who decided to approve those very promising active ingredients as treatments, the work that they're doing is actually take psychedelics out of the dangerous zone to safe and efficacious.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Mark, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think Adi said it beautifully.
Perfect. Well, we do have quite a few questions coming in here as well. But before we go to those, Adi, in the last webinar, you invited everyone who's watching to join Clearmind. People are wondering, what do you have in mind? So how can people join Clearmind and help with Clearmind and help with the process?
Right. So first of all, follow us. Go into visit our website. Also, we spoke about the option maybe to participate in clinical trials. So soon we are going to have a specific zone where people can enter and register and ask if they where the studies that we are going to conduct, where they're going to take place, and whether they can participate in those studies. So follow us, and obviously, if you want to invest in us, we traded in 3 stock exchanges in Canada, in the US, and in Frankfurt. So all of them below would be wonderful. And join us for other webinars, obviously.
Perfect. Thank you. So are you guys ready to take some questions from the audience here? We have a few that have come in. The first one that we have is, according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, excessive use of alcohol costs the United States economy $250 billion a year. What is the chance that it will be subsidized, state subsidized, in order to have less impact on the economy? Could it be said that MEAI promotes drinking in moderation?
So that's a very good question, and it's obviously too soon to say. I would say that from my perspective as a human being, paying taxes and get some medical help or aid, it seems logical to spend a very small amount of money in order to avoid alcoholism, in order to avoid costs associated with the consumption of alcohol. Unfortunately, this is not always the case with health authorities, but it's obviously a very interesting angle to look at it, and this is something that I do hope that will be the situation, but it's too early to say that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just adding to that. If you think about the challenge, I mean, I would personally love to get all psychedelics paid for through provincial health care plans. It's a hard sell when you're talking about therapy because the huge upfront costs, the arguments you have to make, and I've done the math, have to be long-term. And there are long-term arguments for regular psychedelic therapy. The long-term savings, and you have to make those arguments because in the short term it's actually quite expensive. With MEAI, there's really because it's not a therapeutic agent in that you don't have highly credentialed people sitting beside you as you lie on the couch having an experience. You're just essentially the plan is to make it available as a prescription medicine, and then people just take it when they go out drinking. And so the cost will be very low. So it's very easy to envision an analysis, an actuarial mathematician looking at the cost benefit and concluding very quickly that the benefit is to, or the obvious conclusion is to make it available through the healthcare plan.
Mm-hmm. And Mark, you mentioned about the cost, and we know, in the psychedelic industry, other potential therapies are quite costly. So is this something that, would be beneficial and, to everyone, being that the cost might be affordable for people?
Yeah, at the end of the day, we envision it's not expensive to make. The expenses in setting up all the machines and the factories, but once you've got.
Did Mark freeze for us there?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I would add that we're looking in part of the development process. We also want to make sure that the drug is something that everyone can allow themselves. So we are looking at the costs not to be high, So the end product will be available for everyone. So we're definitely looking in this at this, and the fact that it doesn't, just like Mark mentioned, the fact that it probably will not be needed to be given under the psychiatric session or something like that, makes it allowable for us to actually offer treatment that it's and cost-wise it's less than other psychedelics.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes, as we know with other treatment programs,
Yeah,
they do cost quite a bit of money when you add that
yeah.
in. While we're waiting for Mark to get back on the call with us here, I wonder if you could answer this question, Adi. It is from Ian. He says, "Do we know what drug interactions are possible and what enzyme systems are involved in its metabolism?"
So we do have some from those two articles that I've mentioned that were done in rats model. We do know about metabolite a little bit. We're also starting to accumulate information. It's maybe a good time to mention that we just started to operate last May, and I think that we have accomplished a lot since then. But so we are starting to accumulate also information from studies we're already conducting. So we see very a small amount of metabolite, and the amount of them is not very large. I cannot say anything about drug interaction yet, but this is also something that we are looking into.
Perfect.
Hopefully, the articles that I mentioned, which we are going to put on which are going to be available on our website, they can also share some information.
Great, thank you. We also have Edward asking on the pharmacology of MEAI, so it seems to be a
yeah. So the articles, I hope that we will post them very soon, and everyone will be able to download them. And as I was saying, we are now starting to accumulate some more information, new information, and also we'll be happy to share it when it's available.
Perfect, thank you. There's a question in regards to anxiety disorders, and it says, for those that suffer from anxiety disorders, how could MEAI affect the symptoms, both physical and mental, relieve or exacerbate?
So I'm afraid I have no clue. I really can't say. It's not something that none of those polls that Mark mentioned, people answering the effect that they had from consumption of MEI. No one spoke about that, so I really can't say. I'm clueless as the person who asked this, actually.
The next question we have is from Gio, and it says, can someone kick an addiction with MEAI, or does the drug just satiate the addiction? If someone stops taking MEAI, will their addictive urges return?
So these are all wonderful questions. It's too early to say. We do hope that we will be able to kick the addiction. We do hope that after, and this is all we're going to test in our clinical studies, we do hope that after some period of time that you have taken the drug, that you will not need it anymore. It's really too soon to say, but what we do know that you will probably need to take it at least for few months, I want to say, daily, and then it's a huge question mark.
Mm-hmm. Perfect, thank you. And we know that people with alcohol addiction, if at least MEAI gives them the opportunity to have that, clear mind, they can at least work with their therapist, to go into those deeper aspects of the addiction.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. It's definitely something that helps you go through the very difficult stages at the beginning, and give you something that gives time to any other treatment that people may take adjunct to the MEAI, just to kick in and give their effect. So definitely yes.
Mm-hmm. This is a question in regards to trials. If phase 1 trial is done in the US, will a Schedule 1 license be required?
So it's not, MEI is not scheduled currently in the US. It's not, it doesn't consider to be a controlled substance. It doesn't mean that it won't be, it just means that currently it is not. I don't know. I don't think that for the phase 1, it will have a Schedule 1 status. Usually the process is that when you complete the studies, the clinical studies, then you go to the DEA and you ask them to give a control status to a substance if it needs to get one. So it all depends on the safety data that we will have. So it's a long answer to say no, probably not.
Perfect, thank you. And a lot of these questions that we have, coming up, you will know after you proceed further in the trials. This one here is, how often does one need to take it?
So as I said, the way we design the study now, and again, it's very important to say that it's going to be a phase 1. So it's the very beginning of the studies. The duration is going to be relatively short. It's going to be 28 days, and people will take it every day, and we'll see how it. First of all, and the most important part of the phase 1 is the safety. So to show that it's safe, it's not addictive, etc., and maybe to even see some trend of efficacy. I don't know. So that's going to be the first design. So that's what I can say, that the first study is going to be 28 days. People are going to take MEI every day for the 28 days, and we'll take it from there.
Perfect, thank you.
Sorry, Shannon. My internet crashed and I've joined via phone, so my apologies. I don't know what just happened.
No problem. We're happy to have you back with us here, Mark. We've been managing okay.
But not as good as.
So the next question that I have here is from the research that's been conducted so far. Have there been any potential beneficial physiological side effects uncovered thus far?
Beneficial. So we are going to do the first clinical study. So I don't know, and beneficial side effects. It depends what you call beneficial side effects. If it's that you don't want to consume any alcohol, like Mark mentioned when he spoke about the pause that we're taking for people who actually use the MEI, then yes, the answer is yes.
Perfect, thank you. Mark, this one might be for you, and the question is, what current protocols for treating alcoholism are available specifically with psychedelics for clinical use at the moment?
So far, there has been discussion in our community, nothing conclusive, no conclusion of the phase 3, of using both Mdma type substances and psilocybin type substances. Psilocybin being more dramatic and more spiritual, and Mdma being more self-disclosing and dealing with underlying trauma issues. So there has been discussion of addictions and the treatment for psychedelics, and they both fit into the classical psychedelics and the empathogens. So there's different ways of thinking about them, but they appear to both be useful, yes. I mean, we're not there with conclusive statements yet, but they're promising.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, we're almost at time here, and we can take one more question. So the question is, we have one here. It's from Efrat. Why not pursue a parallel duo indication for the treatment of smoking cessation, especially since they seem to coexist?
Interesting thought. Maybe something to think about. Thank you, Fred.
Perfect.
Yeah, in terms of the long run, that makes complete sense. That isn't actually how clinical trials work. Clinical trials work by choosing one indication and then proving that it works for that one indication, and then choosing another and proving it works for that. So it's very hard to, or very impossible to, or unparalleled, that's the right word. It really doesn't, it's not how clinical trials work. You don't choose two indications and see if they work together. You do one at a time, and then later people can combine them.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. So we're almost at time here, and before we leave, I'm going to see if both Adi and Mark have any final words they want to say. But before we do that, we're going to do a quick poll. And the poll is based on our upcoming webinars that we're going to be hosting with Clearmind. So what would you like to see in a Clearmind webinar? So there's going to be a poll coming up here for you in a bit. Our next webinar is going to be on January 26th. So just let us know what you would like to see from Clearmind. Do you want to learn more about the science? Do you want to learn about the patents and intellectual property, the clinical trial pathway, mental health, addiction, trauma? What would you like us to present to you in the next webinar? There's going to be a link coming up in the chat in which you can actually just get your registration in today and sign up for the webinar. So you'll be able to do that just a bit here in the chat. So just give you a few moments here to fill out that poll and just let us know what you would like to hear about for the next webinar. We're also going to be sending out a follow-up newsletter next week with a registration link and a summary of our call today. And you'll also be able to register through that email as well. So thank you so much for filling out the poll. It's still up there if anyone else would like to put their answers in. And we're now at the end of our programming for today. So before we go, I'd like to again thank Mark and Adi for being here to answer any of your questions and see, do either of you have anything else you'd like to say to our viewers today?
Yeah, I want to thank everyone again for joining us, taking the time and joining the webinar. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you for sending all those wonderful questions. Hopefully you enjoyed the webinar as well, and I hope to see you on our next webinars.
And I'd like to say thank you, Shannon. Your gracious hosting is noticed and appreciated.
Yeah, that's the.
Thanks so much. Thank you to all of you for joining us today for this very important event brought to you by Clearmind. If you'd like to stay up to date on the progress of MEAI, make sure and follow Clearmind Medicine right on the website. So you can go to clearmindmedicine.com. And you can also follow Clearmind Medicine now on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. So there'll be updates posted on all of those mediums. So make sure and follow us on every single one of them or the one that you like to use the most. And be sure to watch out for our upcoming webinars, the next one being on January 26th. So again, we'll be sending out that newsletter next week, and you'll be able to sign up for the webinar then, as well as the link should be posted in the chat. So I just want to mention one more thing. Thank you again to all of the wonderful organizations that are showing their support for Clearmind and the webinars. So thank you to the Canadian Psychedelics Association, Canada Supports, World Psychedelics Day, Insight Global, the McKenna Academy. And if you'd like to help support our events, make sure and contact us at info@Clearmind Medicine as well. And there'll also be a quick survey at the end of this webinar, and we'd love for you to fill it out. So let us know how we did today. And thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you at the next webinar. Mark your calendar, January 26th. Thank you again to Mark and Adi and all of you for joining us today. Bye for now, and we'll see you in a month.